Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have such a fun show for you this evening and so important to your flying. Brian Schiff is here, and we are going to talk about what is typically known as the impossible turn, but with a lot of tips from Brian, we'll learn what is actually possible. And so before we get started, as always, a few tips. Tonight's broadcast will be recorded and available on SocialFlight's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for one word, SocialFlight. Subscribe there and you will get to see all of our previous shows, as well as lots of episodes of building our T51 Mustang that's behind me here in the shop and making lots and lots of progress. So be sure to just check that out. And of course, check out SocialFlight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. We have tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations, online events like tonight's show, and also the in-person fly-ins, pancake breakfasts, and things that we care about so much and are so important to general aviation. So please go and check that out. It is all free at SocialFlight.com. You'll see it. You can get your $100 hamburgers there and go fly. And with that, if you hit the mobile app for your phone, you can also be able to participate in the Fly to Win challenge. It's right there on the app, and it will automatically check you in and give you points every time you fly to a different airport, etc. And when you do that, you are entered in to win prizes. We just gave away a custom pair of Flying Eyes eyewear, and our next prize is a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. So very, very cool things, lots of chances to win, and be sure to check it all out at SocialFlight.com. Now, with that, I would like to bring Brian Schiff on the line here. Let me go and bring Brian on. Brian is an airline pilot, a flight instructor, one of the most innovative educators in general aviation, and so passionate. As you might imagine from his last name, he's the son of Barry Schiff, and although the apple didn't fall far from the tree, Brian has carved out a unique reputation for his ability to teach complex procedures and concepts in a way that even a pilot like me can actually understand. I am thrilled to call him a close friend. Welcome, Brian, to SocialFlight Live. How are you?
Hey, Jeff, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And let me just say, I have been like riveted in watching so much discussion lately about the impossible turn and the experiments that AOPA did, and there were some references to your work in that. And this is one of those things that just keeps coming up over the years, and yet it seems like more recently there's more meat to it. There's more to learn. So tell me how you got involved in it and some of the things that are here to talk about on it.
Well, yeah, interestingly, there's been so much recently, like you say, because of the advisory circular for flight instructor refresher clinics that came out advising the FERCs to tell instructors that you need to be teaching this now. Interestingly, I didn't
realize that's how it started. I didn't realize that UASys was an advisory circular.
Well, this has been obviously a debatable topic for probably 40 or 50 years since my dad started researching the topic and talking about it and writing about it. It's actually in his first book, The Proficient Pilot, where he discusses it. And we've kind of refined that technique, but what brought it back to life is that it was put into that advisory circular and recommended to flight instructor refresher clinics that they tell instructors to teach how and when to turn back, when it's appropriate to turn around after an engine failure after takeoff. Interestingly, I was doing a flight instructor refresher clinic myself. I won't say which company. I switch. I go through all of them and I rotate because I like to see what's out there, and no favoritisms. But I saw all of a sudden the topic come up about turning back after an engine failure, and then talking about Brian Schiff was teaching this. I'm like, oh, I know that guy. Like, wow, this is picking up steam. The topic is picking up a lot of steam right now.
It is. I remember way back when I first learned how to fly, I think the only thing I was ever taught is like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And that's like, okay, and that's the end of your training.
Right. Well, the rule of the day was go straight ahead. You lose an engine after takeoff, go straight ahead. Well, what if you're taking off straight out and you climb out your 5,000 feet? Well, okay, at some point, it's got to be okay to turn, but that guidance hasn't been given to anybody. And the way this all got started is back before I was born, my father had an engine failure, 2 of them, in a single engine airplane. And he turned back and made it. And it was at an airport where going forward was definitely not an option. He would have probably killed himself if he hadn't turned back and landed on the runway. He made it. He did not become a statistic, but afterwards he was highly chastised for having done so. And all the hangar lawyers were telling him, this is not the right thing to do. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. And so that really prompted him to start studying the topic and really developing a technique, how to teach it, how to determine how and when, and so on and so forth. But for so many years, it was poo-pooed until this advisory circular came out where the FAA now is condoning it. But there isn't a lot of guidance.
Interesting. So where did it go from there? Because I think a lot of it, I know I first caught wind of it as a non-instructor, so kind of on the layman side of things, when all of a sudden I saw, okay, AOPA went and decided to do some experiments, and that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And as a board member for the National Association of Flight Instructors, I participate in our Mentor Live presentations from time to time. And I was going to do a presentation, and after having seen that come out in the advisory circular, I thought, I want to change gears. I want to talk about this because this is something I can't find any guidance anywhere. You look at the airplane flying handbook, it's not quite there. Here is the FAA telling everybody you need to teach this, and rightfully so. But the guidance isn't there yet. And my dad saw that, he lit up like a tree, he said, no, you got to talk about that. Let's go. And so we put together a program. We did a lot of test flying. We did a lot of organization to try to put together a program. And I did that, I think that was about 3 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago. But then since then, and so many views, it's picking up steam. A lot of people are jumping on that bandwagon. And there's a lot of advice out there. And just because it's on the internet doesn't necessarily make it good. And mine as well. You know,
so let's talk a little bit about your advice. Can you bring me through some of the stages of what you teach, and if necessary, I can bring up any of the slides that you've brought. Give us kind of the little bit of the Reader's Digest version of how you teach people about this very, very important topic.
Sure. The bullet points are, and I might refer to one of these, but initially, first of all, I want to make it clear that I'm not advising that just anybody turn back anytime an engine fails after takeoff. First of all, you only want to do this if you're at an airport where it would be more hazardous to go straight ahead than to turn back. In other words, you have no options, whether it be mountainous terrain or nothing but buildings and playgrounds with kids in them, streets are all full of traffic, whatever. There are airports where it would be more hazardous not to turn back, and that's what we're talking about. If you have nothing but fields in front of you, this is not what I'm condoning. I do not want to say that you need to turn back to the runway if you have a perfectly good field in front of you. So first caveat, only when it's more dangerous not to, is when you would turn back. And that needs to be established before you ever take the runway. You need to be familiar with your airport. And then you also had to have practiced it and know your airplane, to know the altitude that you need to get back to the runway, and to know if your runway is long enough. There are many factors that I can't even fit into an hour-long seminar to discuss in completion, but for the most part, what I teach is if you're at one of these airports, you need to be ready for it. You need to plan on and expect the engine failure and call out when you reach this trigger altitude. It's like a V1, so to speak, and I call it turn back altitude. And if you haven't reached that, under no circumstance should you turn back. If you've passed that, then it's okay to turn back, but as you've practiced it. So what I teach is how to determine that altitude. And it's basically a 360-degree turn at a 45-degree bank angle at glide speed, gliding, and seeing how much altitude your airplane loses in that maneuver. There are some more details to it. And then adding 50% fudge factor. So let's say it takes you 500 feet in a 172 to make it 360. Add another 250 feet to that. 750 feet is your minimum. And that accounts for all the things that the naysayers come at me with, like, what about this? What about density altitude? What about a different weight of the airplane? All great factors. But adding that 50% covers a lot of that. It's conservative. But a pilot needs to have practiced this and know what it feels like. So you had to have done it at altitude. The feel of it is not anything like what you'd expect. It's the amount of rudder, the amount of pull or push, the forces, the look of it is all different. So it has to have been practiced beforehand.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know bank angle plays into it quite a bit. So what do you teach people about bank angle and what they should be, as opposed to kind of leaving it as an open blank page and saying go out and practice 360-degree turns at all sorts of bank angles? What's the goal? What are you actually trying? What would you advise them to try to do in order to experiment when they're airborne?
Sure, and a lot went into determining that. And if you want to pull up the image, start with number 2, and then I'll show you. Then we'll go to number 1, if you want.
Sure. Do that.
The bank angles, what we're talking about is a shallow bank, a steep bank. What do we do? So a shallow bank obviously is going to be safer, give you a much better stall margin, but it's going to take you too far away from the airport. A steep bank increases your load factor if you're pulling, that is, if you're descending and pushing. One could argue it doesn't, but it's going to give you a lot tighter turn, keep you closer to the airport, but also is more dangerous because you're getting closer to the stall. So a happy compromise is, 30-degree bank takes you too far away. A 60-degree bank is a little bit too dangerous because of the load factor that you get. If you go back one slide to number 1, I have the chart of the stall speeds, and this shows you that a 45-degree bank is a good compromise. It only increases your stall speed by about 20%. Where you go up to 60, it's significant. It really goes up after 45 degrees. And before that, like a 30-degree bank, between 30 and 45 is only another 10% or so. But so if your stall speed per se is 50 knots, then it's going to be 60 in the turn while you're holding that, and that's if you're holding 1.41 Gs. It's all predicated on that. So to answer your question, a compromised bank angle for all things considered is 45-degree bank angle.
Yep.
And it's what private pilots are taught.
One thing that's important to visualize that is hard sometimes is people are thinking about this, and you think about taking off, and in your mind you're thinking U-turn, right? That's what you're doing. But actually, you mentioned a 360-degree turn. So talk to me a little bit about 360-degree turn as opposed to like the teardrop kind of thing that you're seeing in the 60.
Right, exactly. And so if you go to image 4, page 4 of that, you'll see you can't get back to the runway making a 180-degree turn. And a lot of people, even the airplane flying handbook, refers to it as a 180 turn back. If you do a 180-degree turn, that might be good if you got a parallel runway there at just the right distance, but it's not going to get you back to the runway. So there have been instructors that were going up to altitude teaching, okay, how much altitude do I lose in a 180-degree turn? And that's not enough. Right. Nor is 270, I discovered, because 270 doesn't get you back, and I learned this by tracking in ForeFlight, doing it a number of times, that 270 doesn't get me back to the same place where I started the turn or back to the runway. So I came up with, basically, if you look at this graphic, it kind of shows that it almost takes 360 degrees of turning, and it depends on where you are and other things, but this is the worst case. So if you can know how much altitude it takes to lose, how much altitude you're going to lose during a 360-degree turn, or 360 degrees of turning, because it's left and right and so on in maneuvering, then that's going to be pretty close to the altitude that you need. So the 360 is the rule that we came up with, because it more approximates the amount of degrees turned in total during the maneuver. Right.
So 360 degrees of turn, understanding your bank angle starting at like 45 degrees roughly, and then is it always at your best glide speed?
I've always said if people say always or never, they're usually wrong. So you won't hear me say always. I'll never say never. But to answer that is, it depends. Most of the time, yes, best glide speed is the best speed. There are times, for example, you have a Bonanza, you have a great distance. You have as far as the number of knots between best glide and stall is pretty significant in a Bonanza. And if you're pitching for best glide, you're going so fast and your rate of descent is so high. And I think in a Bonanza or an airplane like that, and you need to try it up at altitude, but I think a little bit slower than best and I hate to tell Bonanza pilots to fly any slower and do a steep turn while gliding all at the same time. But so it depends on the airplane. But in a Cessna, most Cessnas, I would say definitely for sure, single engine Cessnas, that best glide speed is the ideal speed because it's the least altitude loss for distance flown.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You know, there's another aspect of this that came to mind. Again, I'm not trying to pick on it, but I recently, I watched the AOPA's thing. They did videos, they showed different aircraft doing things like that. And the first thing that jumped out at me was if you're taking off from an airport where you know that returning to that airport will be your best option, shouldn't you be taking off differently?
Yes, absolutely. Now, for a good example of that is when I depart Catalina Airport here, you get to the end of the runway and it's a cliff and there's terrain, there's nowhere to go. That's one of those airports. I take off differently by angling downwind a little bit, or if I have a crosswind, I'll allow myself to drift away from the runway with a crosswind, and I'm in a better position to turn back into the wind and come back. But even if I'm at a non-towered or towered airport, if this is an airport, like Fullerton is another one here locally, nothing but buildings and high trafficked streets nearby, I'll ask the tower, can I make a right turn 30 degrees after takeoff? If they don't let you, okay, but you got to try, and maybe you need to insist on it, or maybe don't go there. If you think there's a possibility, that this might bother you. But yeah, I would take a 30 degree cut and do kind of a teardrop departure, an offset, not straight out, but offset, because it puts me in a better position to make it back to the runway. Absolutely. If I'm at and I do that out of Catalina all the time, non-towered, I take off, I turn downwind, because that way if I have to turn back, I'm turning back into the wind, and that's a tighter turn radius. In fact, if you look at my slide, page number 3, we talk about the wind. So I definitely will go downwind, drift downwind, or turn 30 degrees on the departure and be in a position waiting for that engine to fail. And if it does, then I'm in a great position, or a better position, to turn into the wind and turn. And into the wind is ideal, as you can see here, because the turn radius is a function of your ground speed. Like if you have 0 ground speed, you can turn on the dime, as an extreme example. But this shows and indicates that into the wind is the option. So if I depart, the technique is to either drift with the wind, drift downwind, or maybe make a slight turn downwind a little bit, so that I'll turn back into the wind on the return if I have to.
So the things that occurred to me again, and that example and what AOPA demonstrated, I think for some people, trying to quote them correctly, is that their demonstration showed that small and slow and light aircraft had a better chance and was much more reasonable in their examples at getting back to the runway than faster aircraft. And in their particular example, they showed their small, lighter aircraft making it back to the runway, and that they didn't even get close in the Bonanza.
Right.
But that's where it struck me as, again, shouldn't you be flying for that return if, as you mentioned, it is meant for an airport where there is no good options other than returning to the airport? So at that point, aren't you thinking basically 3 things, okay, I already know that if I'm going to lose an engine, getting back here is probably my safest bet. So I need to get as high as possible in the shortest distance possible, not kind of cruise and be at way out in space by the time, and then think about what direction the wind is coming from, and then think about what you just said about having the wind help you in that turn, or you're deviating, like you said, to start setting yourself up for the turn after takeoff.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. If you're flying an airplane like that, and I wasn't there during the AOPA test, I've seen them and I know what you're talking about. And I think that the Bonanza, my opinion is, could be a little misleading, because better planning could have been done. And I don't know the technique that was used. I know that in that video to which you refer, done by the AOPA Air Safety Institute, they refer to they're using a technique inspired by Brian Schiff. They weren't exactly using my technique. So while they say it didn't work, I tend to think if they used my technique, we might have different results. And and I think they turned back. I don't think they climbed out properly. I don't want to be too critical of AOPA, and I don't want to condone practicing this in high performance aircraft at low altitudes either. So I respect what they were battling, but in a situation like you describe, I fully agree. You need to plan on it, get as high as you can as soon as you can. I don't condone VX in a Bonanza. I don't like it. I don't know if you do it in yours, but I think if you have to take off and fly VX, then you've already messed up. VX is, to me, an emergency maneuver to clear an obstacle that you didn't plan on, not I'm going to plan to climb out at VX so I can clear these obstacles on this short runway. If you have to do that, then I think the planning was poor to begin with. So I think somewhere between VX and VY is ideal to get as high. So don't use an intersection takeoff. Maybe you do a short field takeoff technique, get as high as you can, as fast as you can, offset a little bit so you can turn back into the wind. All of these are factors that should be used in such a scenario like you describe. I fully agree with you.
So I want to learn more about this from you, especially with what you just said about VX, and of course we're both tripping over ourselves. The value that AOPA gave by going and doing that was wonderful, and so it's not meant to be critical of it
Sure.
of them in any way, but it's just to learn. And so if we put aside, I'll put these kind of disclaimers. If we put aside using VX because you have to, and instead we talk about using VX because it gives you that altitude, not because you need it for other reasons. Tell me why you don't like VX.
I don't like it because you're just so close to the attitude that you have in some airplanes. Is so, and I believe everybody should be trained to it for sure. But I would say that a Bonanza pilot, a 210 pilot, a high performance aircraft pilot doesn't generally fly that airspeed. And so here you are flying that airspeed. Not only don't you do it very often, but it is a large pitch change from VX to best glide. And I don't think that most pilots fully appreciate that. If you practice it and are comfortable with it and used to it, then I'm okay with a pilot doing it. But you need to really be ready. You need to be ready to push when that engine fails, because if you don't, even a partial engine failure at VX in such a high performance airplane is going to be a large pitch change that I think will require an extraordinary skill set, not a normal skill set. So I don't like to see people plan on using it. And if you're at an airport where, like Alaska pilots, and this is my regular deal, I do it all the time, that's different. But I normally fly out of LAX or Bakersfield. I got 10,000 feet runways. Now I'm going to go into Apple Valley or something with a very short runway. I'd never use VX, but today I'm going to do it. That I don't like.
That makes a lot of sense. I never actually thought about it that way though, because I've used VX a lot, and not because I had to, but because I was thinking, oh, this is giving me the biggest safety factor. This is getting me up the highest, the quickest, not because there's any other reason, like it wasn't a super short runway or something.
Not the quickest,
and it didn't occur to me. It didn't occur to me what you just said, which is extremely important. How am I going to transition from this to best glide? What's that feel like? To go that forward, to go against trim, which is so important in heavier airplanes. So push so hard against trim to change everything about this plane to get into best glide, so I don't instead have an attitude that just brings me towards stall.
Exactly, it's huge, and you're
really
generally
important.
If you have a turbocharged engine, you're not going to go out and try this full power to chop the power in the VX climb. Pilots with turbocharged engines, especially if you own the aircraft, are just not going to do that. There's no practice involved.
No, you totally should rent someone else's turbocharged aircraft and do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't do that in your own. Absolutely. Right. Don't do that in a normally aspirated high-performance aircraft. Always rent if you're going to do totally abuse a plane.
Right.
Oh, that's not what you were saying?
Are we still on the air? Is this thing on? Yeah.
Okay, that's some really, really good information. So I guess in that, what are some of your, on this particular topic, what are some of your big parting thoughts of what you'd leave people with when it comes to this whole topic? What should they be doing differently in their flying, leaving this kind of this portion of our talk this evening with this turnback?
Well, first of all, be intimately familiar with the airport into and out of which you're flying, and know if it is an airport where there are no options. Use Google Earth. SocialFlight's got some great new tools for looking at the terrain around the airport. If it's not an airport into which you regularly fly, look at Google Earth. Learn how to pan and tilt Google Earth so you can see the terrain and the slopes, not just looking at it from the top. You really can't get a gauge for that. So I really implore pilots to become familiar with the airport and how to use Google Earth to do so, and decide, is this an airport from which departing really is the most hazardous thing would be to try to go straight ahead, and a turnback is the way to go. Don't try it if you're not comfortable with it. Some people don't like it. Some people are more comfortable with the simple plan, I'm going straight ahead no matter what. If that's you, nothing wrong with that. Don't turn back. The problem is, and this is why it's becoming a big issue, is even pilots who are trained don't turn back, go straight ahead. And they take off and they say, if my engine fails, I'm going straight. My engine fails, I'm going straight. My engine fails, I'm going straight. Engine failure, oh my God. And they turn around back to the runway. It's instinctual. You got to fight that instinct if you're not ready for it. But that's why it needs to be taught. And that's why we're talking about it now, is because it's instinctual to go back to a safe place where I came from, that runway. And pilots are doing it even though they were taught to go straight ahead. So how and when do we do it? You need to practice it. You need to feel comfortable and proficient. Do it with a flight instructor, first of all, and a flight instructor, be sure you know how to teach it. Go through my webinar. I go through a very thorough explanation of the technique, and there's a lot more than we can discuss here, so I'd encourage that. But definitely don't do it in an airport where you don't need to. Know how to do it, become comfortable and proficient with it, and have practiced it so that you know how your airplane and you will behave when it happens.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that all of this is touching on really inspires me and rings true, because you're talking about someone taking an aircraft, either one that they own or one that they rent frequently, going up and actually proving to themselves what its performance is at best glide during a turn, doing these techniques, so that they can train out this I hope I can make it concept, because they know what it can do.
Right, the odds of it are so slim, and we're only talking about such a narrow window of the flight where this is just where it is a factor. So we're talking about an infinitesimally small risk area, but risk it is nonetheless. And if you're ready for it and more comfortable, even if you don't have an engine failure, you're going to feel better about your ability to handle it if it happens. So going up to a safe altitude and doing a 360-degree gliding turn at a 45-degree bank angle, if you're not comfortable doing that by yourself, or you haven't done it recently, go with an instructor and do it and just practice it. But more importantly is to do it from a VY-VX average speed between VX and VY, climbing, pull that engine and transition to that, wait for the startle factor, 5 seconds or so. Don't let it stall. But then transition from a climb with power to a glide with no power in a 45-degree bank. It took me a lot, well, that's not saying much, but it took me several times to feel comfortable doing it and getting it. I got my airspeed up to 90 instead of 65. I got the bank angle wrong. It took me a few times to perfect it. Once I did, the first time I did it in a 172, I think I lost 700, 800 feet. And then once I got it perfected, it was 450 feet every time. And wow. I feel comfortable. I know the forces involved.
Wow, that's really important. One of the things of that, I love that idea of going up and experimenting with your plane or the plane that you fly routinely. And I wish people did more of this, and not just going up and experimenting, but doing things on the ground. I'd love to get your thoughts on that idea of people doing more, kind of getting more experience with their own plane. We were in I'll give you an example. We were in a situation last summer where we got stuck somewhere, and there was someone who possibly have helped us go get a part or something like that. And the pilot said, he ran the numbers, did the weight and balance, and said, pretty much at gross, haven't flown this plane, my plane at gross, and so I'm not totally comfortable. And I was fine with that. Absolutely fine with that. Every pilot needs to make their own decisions. But kind of as a side note, I thought to myself, you own this plane. You've owned this plane for a long time. You don't know what it flies like at gross. Shouldn't you? Shouldn't you take it to like a really long runway and or go with an instructor or do whatever you need to? Shouldn't people be doing more to understand what their aircraft can do in all these different regimes?
Absolutely. We fly the middle of the envelope. We try to stay in the middle as a matter of practice, but for learning and training and educating, we need to go to the outside of those envelopes. That's why we train short field takeoffs. That's why we train steep turns. I think it's irresponsible for an aircraft owner not to know what his airplane flies like at max gross weight until he has to do so and is now doing it with passengers on board for the first time, or cargo or whatever. So yeah, throw some weight in. Cases of oil, cases of water. They make great little lead bags that you can throw in. And it sounds dangerous to bring an airplane up to gross weight, but make sure your performance is good, the airplane, the runway, the density, altitude, and do all the numbers and make sure it's okay to be departing at max gross weight. But I think every pilot should practice that. In addition to that, you need to know your airplane really well. The regular things like where the needles are, the engine gauges are every day. If you scan and look at that all the time, you're going to know when one's out of position or one is indicating a little weird. Know what airspeed you should hit the VASI or the PAPI or 1,000 feet down the runway, or 500-foot marker, whatever. Some point, if I don't hit a certain speed by that point, my engine is probably not developing full power. Or I'm heavier than I think I am, or the density altitude's higher, but just key in, something's not right. I normally hit this speed, like almost every jet I fly, have flown, 110 knots is my marker at the end of the 3,000 foot markers for the instrument precision markers. Well, I thought, okay, if I don't hit that speed at that point, something's not right. I reject the takeoff. And the same thing in light aircraft. If I don't hit, I know exactly where to hit a certain speed by a certain point. And if you know that, you're a better pilot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in no way am I advocating for people to kind of be pushing their envelope or even operating towards the outer edges of it. But when someone says to me that they only fly conservatively, to me it's relative to what? Like, you have to know what it feels like to fly your plane at different points within the safe envelope before you know what conservative actually is.
I agree. So do it with an instructor if you're not comfortable, but at least know what it feels like so that you're not doing it for the first time under the gun, or when you have to, or when you're nervous, or when you've been forced into a situation you don't like. It's a much worse time to learn how to fly the airplane in that.
I know I've learned one thing. I won't say the hard way because nothing really happened because of it, but the surprising way was the impact of humidity. And being in the Northeast, we don't have tons and tons of humid, hot days, but then all of a sudden it happens. And I remember a couple times where I thought I knew what the performance of my plane would be, and everything with the charts looked fine, and it was a very humid, hot day, and I was shocked at at how dramatic the impact was. And a big change there was humidity.
Yeah, interestingly, a lot of aircraft performance charts don't account for that. But high, hot, humid, we've all said it when we're learning to fly. It makes a bigger difference than you think. And having that experience, I'm sure, was profound on you. And I've heard something like, on a humid day, if you can feel, I don't perform as well on a humid day either, so I wouldn't expect an engine to, but that air is a lot lighter, a lot thinner, and much less dense than non-humid air, because water vapor weighs less than regular air. So I add 10% just as a rule. If it's a humid day or I'm in a humid environment, I add 10% to everything. So what if I'm wrong and the airplane performs actually better than that? So be it.
That's an excellent point. I'd like to switch subjects. One of the things that I've heard you talk about many times that I really find powerful and want more people to hear from you and learn from you is essentially being the pilot in command, being an assertive pilot where you're the one making decisions, ATC or others are advising and helping you. But this goes into like when to declare an emergency, when to do things like that. Talk to me a little bit about your philosophy of the pilot in charge.
Sure. I think the pilot in command needs to be that exactly, the pilot in command. It's your airplane. You're the one flying it. Controllers aren't flying it. And like I've said before, you've never heard the term controller in command. It's pilot in command. The controller is there to help you. They'll do what they can for you. They separate aircraft that are in the clouds. They may separate you if you're not in the clouds. That ATC, if you ask for help, will help you determine where you are or where to go, because they have a great picture scope for that. Now we have better stuff now than we used to have, you know, in the form of our glass cockpits, moving maps, and GPS and all that. But a pilot needs to say no when they're asked to do something inappropriate. If I have a student in the pattern and I say it's your first solo, if ATC says make a 360 on the downwind, what do you say? I say unable. That's their answer to that. I won't do that. I'm a student pilot. You know, maybe 360s at 800 feet or 600 feet are okay when you gain more experience, but not when you're not experienced. So know your limits, stick to them, and don't let ATC or even a passenger, anybody as far as that's concerned, convince you to do something you shouldn't do. Kobe Bryant. Don't do JFK Jr. Don't do something if you're not comfortable with it. Don't let the passenger be in charge. Don't let ATC be in charge. And as far as getting yourself beyond the point where you feel comfortable, declare an emergency if you have to. If you're not getting from ATC something that you do need, priority, direct, or you need to violate a rule, which you're allowed to do, don't follow a rule just to put yourself into a mountain. You can break the rule to save your life, and pilots are given that authority.
You know, I think it's the first thing that comes to mind listening to things like this is it's so easy to listen to something like this and advice like this and just say, well, of course, like, right. Oh yeah, of course. But I can say personally that once when I was just early on in my flying career, I got against better judgment, got vectored by ATC really into a bad storm where I was trying to turn and they were saying, yeah, I can't have you turn yet. I really need you to go on this heading, and got myself into a very, very bad situation. And what I find so shocking is that 3 years ago, I think, on the way to AirVenture, with all of the knowledge, with all of the you know, couple thousand hours plus, with all this stuff, you know, behind me, and thought I'd never do that again, that I got vectored again and couldn't get up the nerve to tell ATC at that time. I had asked, I told them I don't want to go that way. I told them it doesn't look good, and they pushed very hard and said, I can't have you turn yet. I need you to stay on this heading. And I listened to them and got the, you know, blank kicked out of me, and then deviated, then became assertive and got out of that, and kicked myself for not having learned it permanently one time. And so the point of that story is I'm really aware that this is a hard thing for people to do, and it's something people really need to hear.
Yes, pilots are reluctant to declare an emergency. They fear the aftermath. They think they're admitting fault. They think they're going over the head of the controller, or whatever the reason is, anti-authority. They think they're going against authority. But pilots definitely are reluctant. I learned a valuable lesson flying home from a family vacation in a 414 with my dad, and we were coming home from, I don't know, Zion National Park or Bryce Canyon, something. We're coming back to the LA area, and off to our right is a big restricted area, and off to the left are these big towering cumulus, and we're getting VFR flight following. And you know, I remember my dad flying, and we were both doing the radio and taking turns, but he finally came on and said, yeah, we're gonna need to turn right to avoid some weather up ahead. And they said, well, it's restricted. And they said, so we kind of made a turn and looked behind us, and it was building up behind us as well. Long story short, the only option was to fly into a thunderstorm or fly into the restricted airspace. And ATC said, I can't have you go into the restricted airspace. It's hot right now. Can you take an IFR clearance? He says, yes, I'm IFR rated and the aircraft is qualified and capable, but I'm not taking an IFR clearance into that cloud, so I'm declaring an emergency. I saw him put 7,700 in the box, and he turned right into that restricted area, well clear of the weather. The airplane doesn't know it's in a restricted area. Flies great in restricted areas. Doesn't fly great in towering cumulus. And I thought, whoa, wow, that's, that was impressive to me that he said, no, here's what we're doing. It's not my problem now, it's yours. Clear the airspace. And they did. You declare an emergency, they'll do that. Impresses on air traffic control that you are in a situation that could become dire. Many pilots, just the AIM actually says this, will not declare an emergency until it becomes dire or tragic or almost near death. You need to declare it before it gets to that point. Declare an emergency before you get to that point. Get what you need. And so we flew. I think we got intercepted by something, and we got a phone number. And so what? We landed on the ground, and ATC apologized for not telling us that if we had climbed to 2,000 feet, we'd have been above the hot part of the airspace. And so they got an apology out of us, and thank you for doing what you had to do, and you're okay, great. That was the end of the story. No repercussions, no answering. You're not going to get violated for declaring an emergency unless you do something silly or stupid, and then declare an emergency as a result of that. But under normal circumstances, there are no repercussions except getting to live.
That's really powerful, and I love that example because, boy, that example like kind of trumps everything, right? I mean, I was talking about just the fact that they don't want you to turn. You're literally talking about going into a restricted area, something we look at and we go, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
So like restricted areas, TFRs, pretty much anything.
Right.
You're right.
And so you got to do what you have to do.
Pretty much anything better than that, lightning-filled thing to your left, if that's your only other option.
And when I'm flying along, if I'm IFR and we see something ahead on our route of flight and we know we're going to need to deviate, and sometimes ATC gets really busy and maybe we waited too long and we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and I see this and I tell my co-pilot, or if I'm flying solo and single pilot, I tell myself, I will turn before I hit that, no matter whether I get a clearance or not. You can self-declare an emergency and act on it before going into that, before telling ATC, do not go into that cloud. So I know in my heart of hearts that I'm turning before I hit that cloud, whether I get a word into ATC or not. If I can, great. If I make that turn without calling them, they'll call me.
That's true. That makes a lot of sense. And I've yet to read an NTSB report that said, like, this is the reason for the aircraft crash. But hey, to their credit, they didn't go in the restricted area. Right.
No, exactly. And most of the time, I mean, there's so many cases out there, and AOPA Safety Institute has put some great videos out where, there was a Piper Arrow over Dover, Delaware. He'd done like 3 missed approaches trying to get into an airport, had trouble getting in, and he was over Dover Air Force Base looking down, and he's critically low on fuel. He says, can I land there? And the controller says, no, not unless it's an emergency. And he goes, oh, darn it. And he continues on to this next airport, runs out of gas, crashes, and kills himself. That's an example of, if you're low on fuel, it's an emergency already. Declare now, land at an airport. If you see a runway, you're looking at a runway, take it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what are some of the other terms? We've used the word emergency right now. There are lesser things I know that you can do to buy yourself time, to buy yourself what you're able to do. What are some of the things that come to mind that you recommend that people have in their quiver of things?
And there's, read the pilot controller glossary. They're in there, and one of them is, you say pan. That gives a sense of I need to let you know that I'm in an urgent situation. It's not an emergency yet, but if not handled properly, it could develop into an emergency where you're going to say Mayday, 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 and you get everybody's attention. And that's how you're supposed to do it. The AIM says that. Ironically, there's no pilot controller language saying I'm declaring an emergency, but we all do it. And then here in the US, common knowledge, you're supposed to go Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That tells ATC you're an emergency aircraft. But the pilot doesn't have to declare it to act on it. Some other terminology, obviously unable. That's one of my favorite words. Keep that in your quiver. A minimum fuel. If you are low on fuel, or you're eminently running out of fuel, you may run out of fuel, or you're worried about your fuel state, declare minimum fuel. And that may not get you the priority, but it's telling air traffic control that, hey, any further delays, this could develop into an emergency. And I don't know any air traffic controller who would not help you out. If you say, hey, I'm minimum fuel, they're going to do everything they can for you. If you have to just point it to a runway and land, then you declare the emergency and say, fuel emergency.
Are there any repercussions for that, for saying minimum fuel? Like, does someone play a tape and all of a sudden you get a phone call from your FSDO about flight planning?
I've done it twice. I've never heard anything back. It's just, it was a matter of a go around, a divert, and then a go around there. And now I'm, through no fault of my own and unforecast weather, I was min fuel. So I declared min fuel and they said, Roger, this airport is right here at this, cleared direct to the airport, clear to land. I never heard anything about it afterwards. These things are there for us to use, not for us to be afraid of repercussions. The repercussion is getting to live. And that's how we need to look at it. That's how pilots need to regard these tools that we have. Not abuse it, but use it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I think, one of the things, I really miss being in the pre-COVID world where you could go in and talk with controllers and see it all and see how how it all works. Because one of the things that I learned from some of those tours is about the reasons that often they don't want to do things. It's you're looking at weather and they're looking at the edge of their sector and maybe having to hand you off.
Right.
And those things don't add up. Those are not equivalents in my book of safety.
Right, and so they have the big picture. I love when we can talk to controllers. I try to do every student, and they'll come down now, they'll come down out of the tower and talk to us. So even if you can't go into the tower because of COVID, try to talk to a controller anywhere you can. Get a tower controller to meet you outside the tower and say, can we just chat? Can you tell me some things? When you realize that they are just human beings too, and that if you ask him or her what you'll do for me if I say I need help, I don't know any controller that won't bend over backwards to give a pilot anything they need if they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And pilots will feel more comfortable if they've met a controller or talked to one, especially at their local tower, and learn the nuances of what they're battling, learn what they're going through. And then you can tell, and the pilot can tell the controller the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about, I know, asking for a delay vector or something like that? That's been something that I know someone taught me and I've used before.
Absolutely. It's if you're not in a situation that's dire, like there are some emergencies that you have all kinds of time to work, like you got 5 hours of fuel and your gear doesn't come down. Okay, are you in a hurry to land right now? No. Go out there, take a delay vector, get out somewhere and work the problem. Ask for time. Even if it's something not even an emergency, you're not ready for the approach. I haven't reviewed it. I don't think I'm set up properly. Hey, can you please give me a longer downwind or vector me a delay vector like that? Absolutely. Don't hesitate to do that. It is not admitting failure. And I think a lot of pilots, whenever they need to do something like that, are hesitant because it's like you're admitting failure. It's not. It's utilizing a tool that's available to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the bottom line is that you can ask for another option if there's something that you're being asked for, whether we've talked about the things like weather, et cetera, but even if it has to do with your comfort zone or you're starting to feel behind the aircraft and overloaded or something, and they say, great, hey, we need to put you in a hold right now. We've got something, they, advise ready to copy this whole hold. And you feel like, can I just continue on this heading? Or can you give me something, you can ask for something different.
You can always ask, and if you are experiencing an emergency, don't accept a hold. If it's just that you're not ready and need some more time and you're comfortable doing a hold with whatever it is you're working through, take it. Otherwise, ask for a delay, ask for vectors in lieu of a hold, because you're working something out and that would be too much. And just use plain language with ATC. Just say, look, I got a lot going on right here. Do you mind giving me a heading? Absolutely, and that kind of plays into, like, let's say you're holding short of the runway and they say, okay, clear for immediate takeoff, and you're not quite ready yet. You've got a couple more things you want to do. No, unable, I'll wait. I don't like to take immediate takeoffs. In fact, as a rule of thumb, that goes along with one of my philosophies is never accept an immediate takeoff or without delay or hurry up.
Yeah, I've heard that, and that can be really common. It's like, I've got a Gulfstream on final, you just pulled up to it and flipped your radio. I've got a Gulfstream on final. I need you to roll right now.
Yeah, let them land. I'll sit here. I'll make sure I got everything set. I'll take the time I need. Absolutely. And that kind of plays into one of my, anybody who's watched a number of my seminars, I always say, preach, you got two speeds. Okay, there are two speeds at which you can operate. One is slow, and the other one is, can you beep this, or should I just say screw up?
Go for
So
it, man.
you got slow and
Little
screw
adults here.
up. Yeah. Slow and screw up. Whenever I see somebody rushing to comply, I see accidents, and I've studied many accidents. And one of the common denominators is a pilot rushing to comply or in a hurry. I find if I slow down, I can get something done quicker. Rushing usually takes longer, or maybe let's say you rush and miss some things in it, you save 4 seconds because you did it quickly. Is that worth it? Now, I have actually found I timed a student had trouble with go-arounds because he just got really in a hurry doing the whole maneuver. And I said, whoa, 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 stop, watch this. Full power, raise the nose. I mean, I made it painfully slow. It all went fine, and we timed it. And the difference between doing it like that at a very comfortable pace or rushing through everything and then having to redo the flaps because you screwed them up and you're sinking or whatever, the time difference was only a matter of seconds. So go slow. There's never a time to rush unless you're on fire. I mean, that's my only exception. If there's a fire going on, you need to, but 2-speed, slow or screw up. And I tell everybody I'm flying with, if you see me operating at the second one, rein me in. If I see you doing it, I'll rein you in. But it's tempting. Oh yeah, we got this. Can you take an immediate? Oh yeah, I got it. Can you take a short approach? Oh yeah, no problem. We're mission hackers. We love to comply. We love to show that we got it. And if anytime you hear yourself saying, I can do it, rethink that. Why do you have to do that?
Exactly.
Slow down.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of bravado sometimes in there, right? I felt it myself,
Yeah.
where they want to issue you all sorts of crazy stuff, Can you turn right now and still make it in because I've got a plane on final? And I'm
Yeah.
thinking like, you want your passengers to be like, damn, you pulled that off. That was crazy. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's actually not what you want to hear.
Right. No. Like if you're in the back of my airliner when I'm flying an approach into some airport, like say we're going into a mountainous airport, and you say, ladies and gentlemen, this is gonna look a little weird, but I got this. How would you feel about that? Let's say you're a pilot and you're in the back and the pilot said, I got this, I can do it, watch this, or hold my beer. No, don't do it. Take your time, be humble. This is a gentlemanly game. I've heard it referred to as take a sip of coffee. Okay, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee, then we're gonna deal with that.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
One last topic, which I've heard you talk about that I think is so great. We talk about emergency landings. We talk about, go-arounds. We talk about missed approaches. Here's one you don't hear much about: rejected takeoffs.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I give that on every flight review. At some point, I'm going to give a reason to reject the takeoff. And it's surprising to me how many times the pilot will go because the mindset is go, 10, 20 knots. I pop the door open. Oh, and they go. I mean, it surprised me. Or whatever I introduce at a really low speed, but pilots are not prepared to reject a takeoff as much as they are to reject a landing. And boy, if something goes wrong, be ready. This is in many high performance jets, multi-engine jets, where we have a V1, and so my hand's on the throttle, ready to just pull it back. Okay, thrust levers. Somebody out there just thought thrust levers. You don't have throttles in a jet. Okay. Yeah, but they knew what I meant. Yeah. So I got my hands like this. At V1, my hands go in front. I'm pushing. It's all go. Well, in light aircraft, we don't have that, but I try to have that in light aircraft. I'm ready to stop. Something happens, I'm ready, and I practice it. So I do it with my students at about as soon as they rotate. If we have a long runway, I pull a mixture back.
I like that. I like that visual though, and I think I'm going to start doing that. So I like that idea of until you reach that go no go point, your hand is on the throttle, but not the way I'm used to holding my hand on the throttle, which is holding it in, like it's miraculously going to go flying into the back seat.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, it's about pulling it back, and then I never thought about that.
Yeah, so it's a mindset. If you have your hand up here like this, and you want to keep it from migrating, so you still want to hold on to it, but it's a mental thing. And when you get to the point where, okay, I'm not going to abort. If something happens, a door pops open, a tire blows, whatever, I'm going. Push push on it, on the other side, so you're not tempted to reject. Now, in a light airplane, you might keep it back there. Let's say you take off in a 172 on a 6,000 foot strip. I might keep my hand, ready to pull it back until I'm a couple 300 feet in the air, because I still got runway ahead to land on. If something goes horribly bad, if I get a fire in the cabin at that point, you bet I'm gonna pull the power back and land it right there. But when I know I can't land straight ahead anymore, I go to the push mode.
That's a great idea. Oh my God. So much valuable tips and insights and everything like this. I'm just thrilled every time that I have you on the show. I really do appreciate that, Brian.
These tips come from every time I've screwed up. That's why I have so many. Like I teach my students, every time you pull the airplane out like 2-3 feet so you can look at the entire tread of the tire before you go flying. You never get to pre-flight the bottom of the tire. Well, my students think they're pre-flighting the bottom of the tire when they pull it back. What I'm really doing is saving them from the embarrassment of trying to taxi out of a parking spot while you're still tied down. That habit will prevent it.
I like that. I like that. That's an excellent point, and we've all seen that. Or going up against, I'm like, can't seem to jump this chalk.
Exactly. And I got one more. I know you're getting up on the time here, but here's another one. I play a game with my students, or not even students, I mean learners, I guess they're called now. When we're in the run-up area and it's time to do the run-up, I tell them, here, let's try a little game here. Even on a flight review, let's say I'm giving you a flight review. I'll say, all right, you're going to do a run-up. You're going to go to 1,800 RPM. I want you to look out the window, add the power, and tell me when you think it gets to 1,800 RPM. And two things happen as a result of this. One, you get to learn to know the airplane, and you know where that 1,800 mark is, which you could probably do really well right now. But I don't care about that. This has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is, if you're looking out the window when you add power and you start rolling, you're going to see it. If you're looking at the tachometer when you add the power, I've seen pilots do this. They're not holding enough. Whoa, I got blurry. They're not holding enough brakes. They start the run up and they're looking and staring at the tachometer, and I'm looking out the window watching us start to move, and I'm like, okay, I got to stop moving. Is it me, or
you keep leaning in? You keep leaning in. It's the enthusiasm. It's just bleeding out in the cameras. The camera's a little gun shy.
Yeah, well, it's Rosh Hashanah. It's time to, I'm doing my prayer. Happy New Year, everyone, by the way.
Oh man, those are just some wonderful tips, and I appreciate it again so much. I hope you'll come back on the show sometime in the future, and we'll hit some new topics and get some new things other than we'll dig deep from the well of tips that you give your students. I want you to come out here, and I want to get some instruction from you as well. I can only imagine the things that you'd be slapping me around for.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. I do have fun while I'm doing it, but it's a learning fun. That's why I like Rod Machado. You have fun while you're learning, you're going to have a good time, and you're going to retain stuff. But I'll look for a Boston layover. I'll come out there and we'll do it. Excellent.
Well, Brian Schiff, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening. I know that that you had to juggle an awful lot to join us this evening, and I am very grateful for that, and also grateful to all of you out there that took time out of your evening. Happy New Year as well to those of you celebrating Rosh Hashanah, and I just appreciate you taking your time. We're here to support you. That is why we're here every Tuesday night on SocialFlight Live, why we started the show, and everything we want to do to keep it going in that vein. And so one quick thing with what's coming up here on Tuesday, September 14th, next Tuesday, Pete Bunce of Gamma, the head of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, will be with us as well. Tuesday, September 21st, Captain Gary Dyson of Orbis, the only flying eye hospital, will be here to join us. We did a video on that. If you want to go check that out on SocialFlight's YouTube channel. Just unbelievable effort and things that those folks are doing out there. And then on the 28th, Jessica Cox and her amazing story of achieving the impossible. This is one you just absolutely cannot miss. She is an incredibly inspirational individual and pilot, and I would strongly encourage you to look into her. If you're not aware, she is someone that was born without arms and is a pilot and is truly unbelievable. And so again, with that, Brian, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And thank you. And I wish you all blue skies.